Today is 6/25. At least it is if you live in South Korea, because it was on June 25th, back in 1950, that Stalinist North Korea launched a savage, unprovoked assault on its neighbor, rapidly captured the capital, would have overrun the whole country if it weren't for MacArthur's daring amphibious assault at Incheon in September 1950 that succeeded in driving the aggressors back to their own frontier. The Americans made some debatable decisions afterward, including crossing the 38th parallel, which brought the Chinese into the war, and then agreeing to a ceasefire instead of pounding the Chinese thoroughly. But for all that, they did secure the independence of South Korea, one of the world's leading economies today, whereas North Korea remains sometimes a tragic backwater, sometimes a petty menace, working on weapons of mass destruction. But the bigger lesson of the Korean War is the tragic consequences of refusing, it seems willfully refusing, to learn the lessons of history. Remember, it started only 5 years after the end of the Second World War. And the Second World War, the big lesson from that was aggression unchecked anywhere leads to aggression unchecked everywhere. And yet the United States had run down its armed forces to their smallest size since Pearl Harbor by 1950, even though it was clear that Stalin was up to no good. The world had been through episodes like the Berlin blockade. What's more, the Americans had turned on their South Korean ally, Syngman Rhee, because he was not sufficiently democratic. They let the UN vote against him. They pulled all their own troops out of South Korea in 1949. In January 1950, Secretary of State Dean Acheson pointedly, in a speech to the National Press Club, excluded South Korea from America's defense perimeter in Asia. And then, to everyone's amazement, 5 months later, the bad guys attacked. In his memoirs, Truman says the episode then reminded him of Munich. Well, maybe it would have been helpful if it had reminded you of it sooner. I mean, Truman's backbone then did stiffen. The United States did defend their ally. And they did it through the UN, which a lot of people, including Lester Pearson, thought was a great model. But they were only able to do that because the Soviets were foolishly boycotting the Security Council, protesting that Communist China wasn't seated there, a mistake they never repeated. Now, in some sense, perhaps people learned the lesson a little too much after that. They were willing to stick with unsavory allies, including in South Vietnam, because of what had happened in South Korea. On the other hand, when they learned the lessons of Vietnam and decided it was no good having unsavory allies, Jimmy Carter dumped the Shah of Iran, and you got the Ayatollahs, the fanatics, and to this day the world is trying to cope with an Iran that aspires to acquire nuclear weapons and openly calls for the destruction of Israel. Oh, one more thing. Canada participated in the Korean War in a significant way, despite being, in historian David Berkeson's words, naked when it started. We sent 8 destroyers. A total of something like 26,000 Canadians served in Korea. Over 500 lost their lives. We had over 8,000 troops there at one time by 1951. This is in a country that had a GDP 1/8 the size it is today and a population just over 1/3 of what it is today. Yet we could not possibly mount a comparable effort. We're doing it again. So we need to remember this lesson. Aggression unchecked anywhere leads to aggression unchecked everywhere. That's what caused the Korean War, and it can cause another war today.